Welcome to the political panel. Well, it only took one night of vote counting to change New Brunswick's political landscape in a significant way. Voters gave 8 of the province's 10 federal seats to the Harper Conservatives, 1 seat to the NDP, 1 seat to the Liberals. And in many ridings, the candidate finishing second to the Conservative candidate was orange, not red. So this morning, we're assessing how the federal election results this week could affect the provincial political environment. And joining me from the Conservative Party, Brian MacDonald, the MLA for Fredericton-Silverwood, here for the opposition leader, Victor Boudreau, and here for the New Democrats Party leader, Dominic Carty. Welcome to you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jerry.
I want to say that we invited Green Party leader Jack McDougall to join us today, and we didn't hear back from Mr. McDougall. Okay, I want to start with you first, Mr. MacDonald. From the Conservative Party's point of view, how is the federal election result going to affect provincial politics going forward?
Well, we have a great relationship with the federal government, and as you know, a lot of good things have been built on relationships. And I think it's tremendous the fact that 8 out of 10 ridings returned a Conservative to put a Conservative in Ottawa says that there's great confidence here in New Brunswick in Conservative governments. And I think it's very good for the stability of the province, and the relationship between the federal and the provincial government is going to yield dividends for years to come.
Is there any satisfaction seeing what happened to the other 2 parties?
I'm really happy. I mean, there's a lot of storylines going on right now. As you've said, we're not really sure what to follow, whether it's the Orange Crush, the NDP wave, if it's the dramatic decline in the seats for the Liberals, or the demolition of the Bloc almost entirely. But to me, the most exciting thing is we have 8 of 10 seats here in New Brunswick that are going to be Conservatives in Ottawa. That
result that we saw in the federal election, do you think there was a tie-in to what happened in the last provincial election? Do you think voters' perception of the Liberal Party in the last provincial election held over to the federal election?
Absolutely. There's always a correlation. And I think that our government has done very well provincially. We've governed well. We've introduced a very balanced, even budget, and we've done what we said we were going to do, which is provided some transparency to government and done a lot of dialogue with New Brunswickers. And I think that all has reflected well federally.
Mr. Boudreau, do you buy that contention that what happened federally to your party was in part a result of what happened provincially?
Maybe to a very small degree, Terry, but I think what happened to the Liberal Party in the last federal election, it happened across the country. So I don't think New Brunswick politics has that much of an influence on what goes on in other provinces. That being said, the Liberal brand certainly took a hit. Actually took 2 hits in New Brunswick in the last 6 months. So, that's why I think the renewal exercise that we're going through now is very timely for Liberals in New Brunswick and for Liberal sympathizers to have a chance to look at what the Liberal Party stands for and to help the party rebuild and get ready for the next election. Look, I'm certain that the Liberal Party isn't written off by any stretch. The Conservative government has had some rough goes in the past as well in New Brunswick and nationally. If I think of the provincial election in '87 or the federal election in '93, and they're in power today. So, we will rebuild, we will refocus, and we will regain the trust of New Brunswickers and Canadians.
But now you have to go after voters that went over to Dominic Carty's side.
Well, we need to redefine ourselves as the party that best represents, I believe, the interests of the little guy and girl in New Brunswick, and that looks after the social programs that New Brunswickers want and deserve. And, we do need to redefine ourselves. And as I said, the Renewal Party just released its discussion paper today. Actually, it's on the New Brunswick Liberal Party website. Following a first round of consultations with Liberals, now there's going to be a second round of consultations, which will be much wider, not just Liberals, but open to the public, and get some feedback from that. And as I said, as we continue to rebuild the party, the Liberal brand may have been hit, but it's certainly not down.
Okay, Dominic, what do the federal gains for your party mean for the provincial NDP?
Well, we're hugely excited about what's happened in Ottawa, despite the sadness at seeing a Conservative majority government elected. But hopefully, we're hopeful that this new NDP opposition will be able to hold the Tories to account in Ottawa. And here on the ground in New Brunswick, and there's been several stories on this, one of the things that made a real difference in this campaign was the NDP ground game was there in a way it just hasn't been before, which is why you see a lot of these second-place results. You compare that to a province like PEI, where the provincial party is much weaker. And picking up on what Victor was saying, I mean, we had made the decision after the last election when Roger Duguay, our past leader, stepped down, that we would have a quick leadership convention so we could get out there with a new team and get organized. And I think that's already showing that it's paying dividends, that we're able to go out as a united party on the ground across the province and put together campaigns based on most up-to-date technology, up-to-date practices and techniques. Meanwhile, we see that the Liberals have been, by and large, sort of holding their fire. I think still thinking that it's the same old two-party system, which is one of the reasons the Liberals really bombed in this federal election, that they just didn't realize there was another progressive alternative out there. That I don't know how much longer, how many more years it's going to be before the Liberals pick their permanent leader to take them into the next election. But already you can see the strategy shaping up, that they're going to go into the next election pretending they've never been in government before. And good grief, this Mr. Allward, look at all the bad things he's done. And we're going to try and be out there and say, look, we've been on the ground in your communities, presenting ourselves as a real alternative, which is how Jack Layton managed to come from fourth place to second place. And just the one thing I want to crow about for just 1 second is finally seeing the end, and I think all my friends here will agree, the end of the Bloc Québécois. And I think if the NDP has ever done one great service for Canada, in addition to introducing Medicare in Saskatchewan, an idea that spread across the country, it was wiping out the Bloc on Monday night.
Okay, that being said, though, if you're Brian MacDonald or David Allward sitting in the Conservative seat, you're really happy that you've got Liberals and New Democrats fighting now, scrapping now for all of those voters who consider themselves sitting on the left of the political spectrum.
Well, I think that's something which we have got to sit down and talk about in the coming weeks and months. And to Liberals, Conservatives, Liberals rather, New Democrats and Greens, that anyone who identifies themselves on the progressive side of the political spectrum, and that clearly doesn't include all Liberals, because when Stephen Harper made his what looked like a sort of strange appeal for Liberals to vote to stop the NDP, large numbers of them did, especially in the West. But I think the Maritimes are different. I think New Brunswick is different. And I'm hoping that we can start talking to make sure that we don't repeat these the sort of divisions that we've seen in some previous elections.
Well, how would you accomplish that? Are you talking about an amalgamation of the parties?
We need to talk about, I think it's got to start at something beyond party structures and look at what values do we have as the individuals who are working for either the Liberals or for the New Democrats, and how do we see ourselves going forward? What values do we want to see turned into policies? And at this point, it shouldn't be any more restricted than that. And I think we should start that conversation and continue it over the next couple of years, because something else that can't be underestimated is the freedom to talk, which we have now, which we haven't had for the last few years with minority governments. That knowing now that there is a Conservative majority, we have got 3 years until the next provincial election, lots of things can happen.
Mr. MacDonald, this does present a fairly relaxed scenario for you and Conservatives federally and provincially, doesn't it?
Well, I think it's good news for New Brunswickers. As I said before, we've got good relationships with the federal government, and it's rare that those planets align where you have a majority government of one stripe in here in New Brunswick and another one nationally. So I think it's good for New Brunswick that those have aligned, and certainly we'll be working and developing our relationships with the federal party. I would also like to say that this dialogue that Dominic mentioned, I mean, we're part of that too, and we're always open to having new people join our party, and be quite happy to have anyone participate or volunteer on campaigns.
Well, there we go. We can have a one-party system in the province and save everybody the bother of going to an election.
Well, I wouldn't go that far.
But really, though, that strategically having these two guys fight it out.
Sure, but like I say, I think that we're trying to offer a positive alternative as well. We've got a strong government that's interested in dialoguing with New Brunswickers. We want to hear what everyone has to say, and we're trying to find ways of involving everyone in that process.
What can you do to take advantage of what's happened to the Liberal Party especially, because they're hurting right now? Is there something you can do to drive a stake through the heart of the Liberal Party, or do you just, and I know that sounds mean, but it is politics, right?
Well, the best solution is good government. You govern well, and will be returned in 4 years' time, and that's our goal, is to provide good government for the people of New Brunswick. I will say, though, the opportunity I think in this election, for the next federal election, is going to be Quebec. Those votes, the NDP did a great job getting those votes, but I think they're shaken loose, and I think federally what we'll see for the next election is Quebec's an opportunity for all parties. And I think that I think you'll see Prime Minister Harper being very conciliatory and generous to Quebec in the attempt that we can bring that on side.
Dominic, let me just bring the next question to you. It's a variation of the question I just asked Mr. McDonald. What can you do to contribute to the demise of the Liberal? Well, but that's what he's after.
I'm not feeling the love.
Well, the love isn't there. I mean, looking at what the voters said, they put these guys in second place in many ridings.
But in fairness, Terry, I mean, I need to speak up here. I mean, in fairness, as I said back in 1987. The Tories didn't elect one single member.
True.
Right? And nobody wrote them off at the time. They took the time that they needed to rebuild. And today they're a majority government in New Brunswick. If you look at the federal Conservatives in 1993, elected but 2 MPs across the country. And they've been governing in a minority position for the last 5 years, but have formed a majority now nationally. So, I mean, to say that because we had one bad election federally that we're wiped off the political map, I think is a little harsh.
Okay, but let me just clarify what I'm saying.
We are going to rebuild, and we are going to refocus our attention, and we will be a force to reckon with in the next election, federally or provincially.
Let me clarify my question, because the difference in the scenario that you just raised is that there wasn't a third party provincially, a viable third party, other than Elizabeth Weir and St. John Harbour, to provide an alternative for the left voters. Dominic and his people now, as demonstrated in the last federal election, have become an alternative for people on that side of the spectrum. That's the difference in the two situations.
I think you can't necessarily look at history. I think Victor is quite right that just because a party has won terrible election doesn't mean that it's going away. I mean, the NDP in the provincial election in 2006, we had one of our lowest results ever. We managed to pull ourselves back from that, and we're getting stronger all the time now on the upward part of a wave. And what we have to do to take advantage of the current weakness of the Liberal Party isn't to gloat about it and isn't to be unpleasant to them. It's to go out there and talk about the values that the party has that led us to moving to second place in Ottawa and led us to double our vote in the last provincial election. And as long as we do that and continue to be sort of a credible, reasonable, open party that's interested in talking to people and including them and showing them how they can take a real role in politics. So I think that's where the Liberal Party fell down recently in the last few elections federally. It just seemed like an increasingly small number of people who weren't really listening. And you heard the Liberal campaign in the last few weeks of this federal vote, so people saying, "Oh, come on, be serious, stop screwing around, come back and vote for us. This is our country." And that sort of thing really turns people off, that you've got to be humble and respectful. And I think that's we'll continue to try and do provincially.
But let's be fair now and call a spade a spade. I mean, there are some NDP MPs that got elected that hadn't even set foot in their riding during the campaign. I mean, they got picked up by this wave, or this orange crush, as the media called it, and they were voting for a leader without even knowing who their local candidate was.
I think that's something that you guys should,
that certainly is going to have
absolutely
an impact. And the next 4 years will tell. I mean, we'll see if these MPs do manage to get roots in their ridings or not, and actually connect with their electors.
But Victor, you have to reflect on what that means for you and the Conservative Party. That you're quite right, and that's certainly not ideal. And that's why we're making sure in New Brunswick that we'll have candidates who we can absolutely stand up and put in front of the media from the first day, who will run full campaigns. That's certainly a commitment I'm going to make for the provincial party for the next election. But at the same time, you have to look at the reason why these people were elected, because of the degree of dissatisfaction they had with your party and your leader, and with Mr. Harper and the Conservatives. That's why they voted for those people.
Yeah, but
we should always be careful about saying that the voters made a mistake. I think
no, I'm not saying the voters made a mistake. But at the point I'm trying to make is that when a voter needs the help of his or her government, they call their local representative.
Right.
They don't call the national leader or the provincial leader, right?
Right.
I mean, they call their local representative, and in this case, they don't even know who that local representative is. So, I mean, we need to give that a chance to see what's going to happen there as well. As Brian said earlier, I mean, these votes were there, but they're pretty loose and shaky, I think is the term.
Was it a protest vote or not?
Exactly, and that only time will tell.
And we'll see. We had, in the Tory sweep in '84, I think it was Dom Mazinkowski who was in a very similar position. He was in a riding, became a very prominent Mulroney cabinet minister, a very good cabinet minister by many accounts. And he got into that position through the same sort of wave. No one had any idea who he was. He was a name on the ballot. This happens regularly in elections. I mean, the media is picking up on some of the NDP MPs who are, because it's new and interesting, because we haven't done this before, but there have been Liberal waves and Tory waves where I know you guys have sat in your war rooms and gone, who on earth is that? Where? What seat? Oh, wow, okay, great. And yeah, you pick up and you make sure they get the right staff and the right support, and some of them turn out to be excellent, the same way that some MPs who are supposed to be fantastic turn out to be complete duds.
Let me ask you this based on something you said earlier when you said we have to talk. Were you suggesting that it is time in the province of New Brunswick for the Liberal Party and the New Democratic Party to talk about ways to bring those two parties together?
What I'd like to see is a discussion that could lead to something in the form of a larger meeting, to have a discussion among progressives in New Brunswick in the next year or so, that we need to look at the message that voters have sent us in both provincial and the federal elections and talk about what values we have that we want to see turned into laws and whether the current party system that we have makes sense as a vehicle to deliver that.
Can you accomplish that without an amalgamation of the parties?
I have no idea at this point. There's all kinds of models that have been used in different countries to try to have parties working together, or to have, again, it's not the parties working together, it's the ideas and how you get them out there.
Does that appeal to you in any way?
Look, I don't think that Liberals are prepared to throw in the towel here. I mean, there's nothing wrong with having discussions with anybody. I mean, we're an open party and prepared to dialogue. But that being said, I certainly am not prepared to throw in the towel and say that the Liberal Party of New Brunswick is no longer relevant. I mean, we are going to rebuild. We are going to renew. And, we will be ready for the next provincial campaign in 2014.
Mr. MacDonald, would New Brunswickers benefit from having two parties instead of three?
I think when you look at political history, it is always an ebb and flow. And we've had two-party systems, we've had multi-party systems, and we may go back to a two-party system. I think what's best for New Brunswickers is good government, and that's why I'm encouraged to hear what Dominic's suggesting, and that is more dialogue, more discussion, and open up the political spectrum. And we've said as a party that we want to find ways of meeting the needs of all voters, even those who voted NDP, because they're still part of the electorate, they're still part of our government, and we need to represent them. And so we're looking for ways to include them in that process.
Okay, go ahead, Mr. Boudreau.
Well, that being said, Dominic did speak of progressives, and certainly the National Party, anyway, took the word progressive out of their name.
Well, that's not fair.
And well, I mean, let's face it, they did.
And in fact,
what we are seeing is, what I would consider a right-wing government forming government nationally. And, Allward government, when we look at some of the decisions they've made in their first budget, have mirrored some of the decisions that were taken by the Harper government federally, whether it be cutting status of women funding, whether it be cutting funding for culture, whether it be, there are many issues there where we can find parallels between the two.
And many areas where we agree, which is why there needs to be this conversation, because you look at what happened with the Conservative Party federally, that you had the Reform Party and the Tories who split after the '93 disaster, and then you had the United Alternative and then the Alliance Party, which was this long, painful process, but eventually led to now multiple election wins, first minority and then majority. And so we agree on cutting the status of women. We agree on a lot of the problems with the Allward budget and with the challenges that the Harper Tories are going to throw this province's way in the next few years.
Go ahead.
Thanks, Dominic. I mean, a lot of parties have had mergers or changed their names, or that's happened over Canadian history, and you don't have to go back. You can go back to the examples that have been mentioned here. You can go back even farther in history, and there's been all kinds of examples of that. Like I said, I go back to my key point, which is what's best for New Brunswickers is good government. And this is a great opportunity. We have a government here that's made the necessary decisions to trim down the budget so that it can be affordable for New Brunswickers, so that we don't have massive debt and deficit going forward. That was an important decision that had to be made, and I'm proud of the way our government's handled that. And likewise, in Ottawa, we've seen a government that is dedicated to an economic recovery, and this is a difficult time. There's been a global economic downturn, and Canadians have voted, and 8 out of 10 seats in New Brunswick have returned a deliberate result that says, yes, the economy is very important to New Brunswickers. We make that our priority.
Would it be a positive development to have New Democrat MLAs in the legislature?
I think it's important to engage all members of the electorate. I welcome whoever gets returned by the voting population, certainly. I think that the party system works very well the way it is now, but it's important to bring everybody into the dialogue.
Gentlemen, I appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Terry.